Today's show is sponsored in part by Fulton Commons. We have had a co-working space there for a while. It's over in Manchester in this historic little neighborhood, and it's really thoughtfully decorated, like actual art on the walls, bright pops of color, these historic maps and eclectic furniture, and just so much gorgeous natural light. It really is a great place to be able to buckle down and get some work done, but also just like the experience while you're there. And all of this, of course, is just on the main floor because downstairs is something totally different. It's a shared commercial kitchen, so fully stocked with equipment and appliances, storage, big fridges, prep areas. If you are just starting out in the food space and you've maybe outgrown your house but don't have it in you yet to go get an expensive lease on your own, this could be the perfect place for you to hone your craft and get to know other entrepreneurs. Also, if you are co-working upstairs, it can mean delicious samples. Check out Fulton Commons for yourself, for your small business, and for your food production needs. Visit fultonpgh.com to request a tour. CityCast Pittsburgh is brought to you today by AIDS-Free Pittsburgh. Did you know that there are over 5,000 people living with HIV just here in southwestern Pennsylvania? The Ryan White HIV/AIDS program provides support services to people living with HIV to help them get the care that they need. These services include assistance with healthcare, medications, housing, transportation, food assistance, and treatment for substance use disorders. Visit AIDSFreePittsburgh.com to learn more. Today on CityCast Pittsburgh, when our region wants to convince a business to come here, they can sweeten the deal a bunch of different ways, helping find land, incentives like lower taxes, even just saying nice things about the project in public. Well, back in 2012, we did all of those things for the global oil and gas company Shell, including a still unrivaled $1.65 billion tax break from the state of Pennsylvania. And Shell, in turn, made us promises. This would be the start of an energy renaissance. There'd be thousands of jobs. And there were some, but now, just 2.5 years after they turned the lights on, this facility, this cracker plant, it's up for sale. Today, I'm with Kylie Benz, a reporter for Inside Climate News, to talk about why Shell already wants out of this thing and why one analyst called this whole project a terrible investment of taxpayer money. It's Wednesday, September 10th. I'm Megan Harris, and here's what Pittsburgh's talking about. Kylie, welcome back.
Thanks so much for having me.
Let's start with the basics, I guess. Where is the Shell chemical plant? What does it look like, and kind of what's the vibe in the area?
So the Shell chemical plant is in Beaver County. It's right on the river, and it's across the river from the town of Beaver. And it's quite large. It's hundreds of acres. It's very noticeable when you are driving in that area because it's so large and so different from the things that are around it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's visible from towns up and down that river valley too. Like if you go into like Beaver Falls, for example, or a little bit south of there, like you can't miss it. You know exactly what direction that thing is in.
Right. And when they have had some issues at the plant, like when they've had flaring, people are reporting that they can see the flaring and the lights from the plant from miles away.
Okay, so take us back in time a little bit to how we got here, right? Like before this thing gets turned on, when people were still talking about this renaissance, our region's energy and petrochemical renaissance. What was going on in Pennsylvania at the time, and what was the vision for this?
So you can read about this vision if you go back to a 2020 report from the Federal Department of Energy, and they talk about this idea for an Appalachian petrochemical renaissance, where they wanted to build a whole bunch of petrochemical facilities in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio. They envisioned this as being similar to the petrochemical hub that already exists on the Gulf Coast, and which is massive. And so the Shell plant was going to be one of many similar facilities built in the region.
Gosh, it feels like it wasn't that long ago. And then Shell comes online kind of in the midst of it, like 2022. But it feels like it had been in the works forever, like a decade or so before that. Why did Shell choose Beaver County in the first place?
Yeah, so it definitely had been in the works for a very long time. In 2012, the state passed this really big tax package specifically for Shell that would grant them a $1.65 billion tax break over 25 years. And I think it's hard when you read a number like that to really understand what that means because it's such a big number. But when I talk to financial experts about this deal, they use words like unprecedented and I've never seen anything like this before. It also was record breaking in the state's history, the biggest tax deal that had ever been made. And it wasn't even the only tax break that Shell got. They also got breaks on other taxes as well. And because the state passed this tax break and did so much work to lure Shell to Pennsylvania, Shell decided to build in Pennsylvania rather than in Ohio and West Virginia. And to take a step back, the reason that people thought there should be a petrochemical hub, or there could be, is because of fracking. So when you make petrochemicals, you need feedstock, and the feedstock comes from natural gas. And so the idea was that we were going to put these facilities right near the fracking wells, and then we'd also be close to markets in the Northeast. So from a business perspective, like that was the idea.
If you lived in the Pittsburgh region, like anywhere around here, like in the early 2010s, like that's all anybody talked about. And the fracking bros were everywhere. Like they were young, they had a lot of money. They usually had these like really like sort of nomadic lifestyles. A lot of them lived in trailers and other things, like because they had to be willing to pick up and move and go anywhere.
Sure.
So it was a lot of transients in the city that just flooded in all at once.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty typical for fracking, for any type of extractive industry. There's a cycle where, you might need a bunch of labor and people to start up. And then once things are up and running, you don't need as many people. And the Shell plant followed a similar pattern. It was under construction for 4 years. And at that time, there were thousands of workers who were brought in, both from Pennsylvania and from other states, to build the plant. I think as many as 8,000 or 9,000 workers over that span, which is a lot. And I think there's some evidence that there was economic benefits to Beaver County because of that boost. But now Shell only employs 500 permanent employees. So most of those people have moved on, either went back to whatever state they came from, or they're doing other work now.
I think that word you used, extractive, is really telling in this sense because, 2022 is not that long ago, and now they're talking about selling. So bring us to the modern day. What has happened? Like, is the honeymoon period just over, or did something go terribly wrong?
Yeah, so this is what I set out to understand in writing this story, because I initially didn't understand that either. Shell,
like a tax break over 25 years suggests you will be here, in fact, for 25 years.
Right. And the plant is slated to run, its lifespan, expected lifespan is at least 25 years. It could be more than that. And so I think that, for most people watching this, you're like, oh, it only came online in 2022, the end of 2022. Why does Shell already want to, either sell it or find, like they've said, strategic partnership is their phrasing, is another possibility that they would kind of sell a stake in it to another company. And so in talking to financial analysts and experts, petrochemical people, what they told me is that there's a few things going on. So one of the things that's happened is that since 2022, that was kind of a turning point in the plastics and polyethylene market, which is what the Shell plant makes. It's a type of single-use plastic.
Yeah, it's like if you've ever heard anyone talk about nurdles, those like teeny tiny little like plastic dot looking things. They're like bubbles kind of.
Yeah, so they make these tiny little pellets, and they can be melted down and made into things like plastic bags and bottles, jars, cups, things that you only use once and then throw away.
And unfortunately, a lot of them have ended up in our waterways too.
Yes, there is quite a bit of plastic pollution, not just in the Ohio River, but in waterways across the country. I think that with Shell, it's sort of unclear how much they may or may not be contributing to that at this point. But in 2022, what happened is the market changed because in China, there had been great demand for this type of plastic, more demand there than there is here. And a lot of American companies, like on the Gulf Coast, were selling their plastic to China. But China decided that they wanted their own petrochemical facilities. They built up their capacity, and they built up so much that they exceeded demand in China. And basically, like, the competition to sell plastic in China became very different than it had been before. And so the market conditions that Shell was coming online into were very different than they had been when they started this plan in 2012, which was 10 years earlier. And the other thing is that the petrochemical renaissance didn't pan out. Shell is the only plant that was built. All of the others walked away for various reasons. Some of them decided it just didn't make sense economically.
Like to build at all or to build in our region?
To build at all.
Which maybe it sounds like that was a good financial decision on their part if the market changed so much too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one way to look at this is that Shell explicitly said at one point, there was an executive who said, we built in Pennsylvania, we built this plant because of the tax break. And I think that if the tax break hadn't happened, if it hadn't been such a good deal, there's a world where this plant maybe wouldn't have been built in Pennsylvania or in Appalachia at all.
Today's show is brought to you by Huel. That's Huel. My mornings are sort of chaotic. I'm not an early riser, and despite my best efforts, we are somehow always running late. But you know what I do not skip? Breakfast, because Huel makes it easy to get a complete meal, stay full, and get your vitamins in. Huel's Black Edition powder has 27 vitamins and minerals, all the nutrients you need to thrive, including 40 grams of plant-based protein. No sugar added, it's gluten-free, and they've got a bunch of flavors like strawberry shortcake, coffee caramel, cinnamon roll, even classic chocolate and vanilla. And now Huel's got even more to offer. They just launched this Huel Daily Greens Ready to Drink, and it's pretty much super greens in a can. I have been skeptical about this sort of thing in the past, but Huel says no powders, no pills. It's sparkling, and it comes in flavors like blueberry, apple, peach, and hibiscus. Once again, packed with 42 vitamins and nutrients plus superfoods. Try Huel with 15% off for new customers today using my code Pittsburgh at Huel.com/Pittsburgh. Fuel your best performance with Huel today. Shell has threatened to sell before. They've talked about it. Why is it more serious now? Why are we taking them for their word?
I mean, I think the comments from the CEO are pretty clear that, they are looking for what they call strategic partnerships and opportunities. And the reason is that the company as a whole, the CEO said something like he wants to go back to brilliant basics, which for Shell is oil and gas.
I was about to say that's gas, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So petrochemicals is something that they are moving away from. And this plant is a plant that they want to move away from because they don't want to be in the chemical industry as much. And I think the key thing here about a strategic partner or a sale is that because the Shell plant is so isolated in Pennsylvania, there was no renaissance. They don't have the storage facility nearby. When that plant goes down, when it malfunctions, which it has quite a few times since it's gone online, Shell loses money. So production has to stop. And if they have orders from customers, they have to say, oh, we can't fulfill your order at the time that we said we would. Now, if you're a global petrochemical company whose focus is making this type of plastic, you have another facility and you can still fulfill the order on time. But Shell doesn't have another facility. And so basically, like, the experts that I talked to said that when this plant is running, it is making money. But when it goes down, it hurts the company because they don't have a backup.
Has the current leadership talked at all about regrets, like the R word?
They haven't talked about regrets that I've heard of. I think, they're being very judicious and careful about the way they talk about it.
I mean, those corporate types always are, right? Like they need to spin a good yarn because they can't tell you that it's a jalopy. They need you to believe in its potential so they can sell it to you.
Right. And I mean, they did spend $14 billion to build it, which is several $billion more than they planned to spend. And it's a brand new plant, as we just discussed. The people that I talked to said, though, that it is profitable, in part because of the tax break. The discount that they're getting is huge.
Do you know if the tax break would follow with the next owner?
I don't think anyone knows that for sure, but the people that I interviewed seem to think that it would.
Or at least maybe it's a negotiable point on it. I mean, what about an asking price? Like, what does a nurdle plant go for these days?
I don't actually know the answer to that question, although it is a really good one. I think that the potential deal is very much in its early stages at this point.
Yeah.
They're kind of exploring is the word that they used.
I love the vagaries of this kind of thing. I mean, what about potential buyers? Like, is there anyone, would it be someone in our region that like is already known to us, or can you imagine it being a totally different company?
I think it'll be a different company. The people I talked to said that it will likely be a global company, a petrochemical company, a company that doesn't have this like backup production problem. So a company that already owns polyethylene facilities elsewhere.
What about the communities around it? You know, we're talking about it from the corporate perspective, but like, let's bring it home to the folks who actually live there. Like,
yeah,
this has got to feel like whiplash. Like it does for me, and I don't even live next to it. Like, any sense of how they're feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are really disoriented by it, again, because it's only been running for about 2.5 years. And it was such a long, drawn out planning and construction process. There's concern, like people are worried about what it would mean for the workforce or what will happen to the plant. If there's a new owner, how will they operate versus Shell?
Right. And that's to say nothing of the environmental piece of all of this, like all of the alerts and the smells and just like the worry that our neighbors have had to carry through all of this.
Yes. I mean, I've interviewed people who live nearby and they talk about, they walk outside on their patio on a nice summer night and the sky is like blood red orange and it's like an alien invasion has touched down in Beaver County. And I think that people are really concerned about the long-term potential public health impacts of the plant because people have reported smelling odors. There's been people who have experienced health symptoms that they think are connected to air pollution from the plant. And the plant paid $10 million for air quality violations just in 2023. There was also a class action lawsuit filed over their dust and light emissions. And I've interviewed people who both regret moving to Beaver County because of the plant and who actually moved away because of it.
Which is such a shame because those little communities over there they're so cute. Like they're really
very
nice.
Charming.
Like, they're so charming. They're beautiful spaces. They have lovely green spaces, a gorgeous river walk, but then just across the street, it's like kind of ruined by this big behemoth plant.
Yeah, I think it'll be really, perhaps sobering to track what happens to property values and what happens with the population of the county and if there is any connection to the plant. Because I think that people who want to live in a place like Beaver County, they're looking for something that's a bit greener. They like that charming, like small town feel, and they don't really want to live in the shadow of a giant petrochemical facility.
Mm-hmm.
There's concern, like people are worried about what it would mean for the workforce or what will happen to the plant. If there's a new owner, how will they operate versus Shell? And I think those are all valid questions that we just don't know the answers to yet.
Is there any hope maybe that a new buyer could maybe turn it, I don't know if turn it around is exactly the right language, but like bring new economic development, maybe be more compliant with some of the environmental regulations that Shell has seemed to struggle with from time to time?
I think there's nothing wrong with hoping that they would be more compliant with environmental regulations, but it's very hard to say whether that would actually happen. When it comes to economic development, I have not seen any evidence that or heard any evidence that another owner would change that.
I guess I would at least hope that the workers could potentially keep their job. Is Shell going to keep this thing online while they hunt around for another buyer?
Yes, I think they definitely will because, as we said, when it's running, it's making money. When it's not running, it's costing them. So It's in their interest to keep it going.
Got to keep the lights on. Literally, it's
yes.
So massive. I cannot overstate that. Before we let you go, I would love to hear your take on like this vision piece, right? Like it didn't materialize. We did not, in fact, get any renaissance. But like, how is maybe Pennsylvania feeling about this? Like, if the company doesn't regret it, like, do our lawmakers have some culpability here, or are they taking any?
I haven't heard anything from lawmakers, but I went back when I was writing this article and looked at news coverage from 2012 and 2011 to see what did politicians say at the time about what this plant would mean for Beaver County and for Pennsylvania. Like, what was the case they were making to pass this enormous tax break? And they were saying some pretty wild things. The Corbett administration, when Tom Corbett was governor, was a big proponent of this. And they claimed that it would spawn 20,000 jobs indirectly and directly.
That's the piece that I remember. Like it was so much about jobs, like you get a job, you get a job, you get a job. And that was true for a time within the building of it. But that was what I heard, everyone in positions like yours, Kylie, where they were like, yeah, but what about once it's online? I don't think you're going to need that many people.
Yes, I think that even people who were paying attention at the time. So I did find this report. I'm forgetting the name of the organization. It's like the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center or something. They did a whole report on the tax break deal before it passed. And they said, this is not a good idea. It is a windfall for Shell. It won't create that many permanent jobs. It'll be really expensive for taxpayers. And, they weren't listened to. And a lot of people believed what politicians were saying. And you can't totally fault the public for that. When the governor and people who work in the administration are saying this will be a huge boost to our economy, people believe that. And they thought, okay, this is going to be great for us. Like it'll attract all of this investment. More people will move to the county. Other businesses that are indirectly related will, spring up to serve those new people. But when you look at economic research and the metrics, none of that has happened. And in fact, Beaver County's population has declined since 2012. There's flat or zero growth in GDP, in the number of jobs and businesses. So they've also compared Beaver County to the state and to the United States as a whole, and it's declining relative to those two stats. It's also not outperforming neighboring counties. So this whole idea that this plant was going to be this game changer economically for Beaver County just hasn't come to pass.
I mean, is anyone in Pennsylvania hierarchy, I know Corbett's not in office anymore, but is anyone acting appropriately ashamed of themselves?
Not that I know of. I mean, it would be interesting to do a follow-up story and interview some of the legislators who pushed for this.
Well, Kylie, we'll watch out for that from you. What about the timeline for all this? Do we have any sense of when we may find out whether this thing sells or what happens next?
I don't think we know that at this point. The CEO first mentioned something about this in March, and there was a report in the Wall Street Journal kind of saying that Shell was thinking about selling its chemical assets, including the Pennsylvania plant. And then in July, we had this more confirmation that they were specifically thinking about a deal for Pennsylvania because the CEO said something like, we are not the natural owner and operator of that asset.
You're not the natural owner of the thing that you actually own. Cool.
Yes, that you built.
Yeah. Kylie, we'll be watching for more from you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
That is all for today here on CityCast Pittsburgh. By the way, those claims Kylie mentioned that people are seeing plastic in their waterways, well, a different closed plant also in Beaver County just settled a $2.5 million lawsuit over this exact thing with environmental groups Penn Environment and Three Rivers Waterkeeper. If the settlement is approved by the courts, they say the money is going to be used to try and get the plastic pellets out of Raccoon Creek and that stretch of the Ohio River. Support us by becoming a CityCast Pittsburgh neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. We will be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. We'll talk to you soon. Okay, we're going to do this one more time.